Howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast 223. Well, I trust you are doing well, and I appreciate ever so much you're taking time. Stop on by and give it a listen. Hey, you guys have been really active this past week. Thanks for the great emails. Today's podcast actually comes from one of them from last week's topic. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to stop on by. And remember, I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. So you have all those ways you can reach out. And I do answer as timely as I can everything that comes my way. So I appreciate the point blank, reach out, shout out, taking time to touch home base. So thank you so much. I also want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera, bedfords.com. They've been really busy. They've got lots going on, a whole bunch of stuff coming up in the first quarter. So make sure you head to bedfords.com. Check out all their activities there to help us photographers, myself included, become better shooters. And while you're there, you can't help yourself because, well, it's just in our DNA as photographers. Got to buy stuff, even myself. Yeah, I'm kind of addicted to that and woodworking tools. So, hey, they're a great place to go. Just remember that when you check out, make sure you use that special code MOLSE. You save some real money. For most states, no sales tax and over $99 free shipping. More and more of you are sitting there, and I appreciate it, taking time to thank me for turning you on to Bedford's, but hey, it's Bedford's doing. They're the ones with the killer sales force, incredible service, and great deals. So thank you, Bedford, for continuing to sponsor the Moose Podcast. Well, let's get into this week's topic, remembering it all. Howard sent me a really cute email. Made me really laugh out loud when I read it. Comes from last week's podcast about new genre, New Year resolution. And he said that he's a little bit old to be changing genres at this point, now that he's well retired. And he says something about his golden years starting to get a little tarnished. So, Howard, I'm not sure how old you are, but you had a really cute line, and you said, I'd love to change new genres, but how do you remember it all? He goes, I'm getting so old I can't remember where I put my teeth when I went to bed. That one had me chuckling. So I appreciate that, Howard. But let me see if I can actually give you a solid answer to that question. So it kind of goes way back as far as my own way of doing it for my original mentor when it comes to biology. And Dan stressed that having a solid foundation when you're looking at a species, trying to understand it, was critical. In other words, put it in photographic terms, what would be that solid foundation? It would be the basics, shutter speed and aperture, exposure compensation, how they all team together when we see it and feel it to expose for the light to tell a story. Now, that in itself is a huge thing to sit there and conquer as photographers. It's really important. Then you start adding to it things like white balance. Then you start, almost a little bit of, a mind burn. So then how do you remember the rest of what's happening? Well, you've got to have that foundation. That foundation is something that you could call, for lack of better terms, muscle memory. And most people think of muscle memory of, shooting a sidearm or sitting there and cutting wood or putting a ball on a green. But all of this in photography is the same as muscle memory. I haven't talked about it for a few episodes, so let's talk about my favorite muscle memory. You guessed it, proper hand holding. I bring it up because I had this incredible experience at Cape Disappointment with just, I don't know how Mother Nature does those waves. Absolutely spectacular. And I was watching photographers out there shooting in the wind, in the rain, in the mist with the most, gosh awful hand-holding technique. I don't know how you got a sharp picture, other than I know a number of people, because eavesdropping, were cranking their ISO into 5 digits. Lordy, that's not how we achieve quality. So, how do you remember basic hand holding? You have to do it every day. You have to pick up the camera every day. I pick mine up every day, no matter if I'm out shooting something real, as an assignment or fun, or I'm at the ranch and I'm photographing birds, or Miss Maggie, who's over here on her bed watching me with cocked head like, why'd I say your name? So proper hand holding. Quick, remember, right hand goes on the camera body. You're going to take your index finger and roll it on that shutter release. Don't jab at it to take a picture. Your left hand is going to be turned upside down so the palm is facing the sky. The lens barrel is going to rest in your palm, and then you're going to bring your elbows into your sides, bring that camera back to your eye and press against your forehead. Basic hand holding. It needs to be a muscle memory, because when it is in a second nature, you can then start remembering other things that are important. Now, these camera bodies, they're computers, and they've gotten quite sophisticated. In the last few years, they've gotten, I think, really user-friendly, and even more user-friendly customizable, if such a thing is even possible. So, talking about the Nikon D6 or the Z6 II or Z7 II, you can customize those bodies to function the way you want to shoot. And that's really important you do that. Now, I've got my settings on the website, and that's a good place for you to start. But when it comes to customizing the controls, what button does what, I highly recommend you make it yours, and then that's just one less thing you have to remember. One example, I just picked up the Z70-200 2.8, which, let me tell you, is a spectacular lens. No vignetting, tack sharp, focuses close, really smooth, and in that nasty weather, so sealed tight, it's just fun to operate. But getting back to the point, it has buttons on the lens barrel that you can, through the camera body, program to do certain functions. So in this case, the forward, or the buttons closest to the front element, which is where my hand rests for proper hand holding, to bring it back to that topic, I program it to be my AF on button. So I don't have to think about pressing the AF on button on the back of the camera to fire. I can just press that button on the lens barrel. One less thing to think about. It's quick, it's easy. Helps me remember more important things like proper hand holding. Now, what else can I sit there and help you with when it comes to remembering it all? Well, something that I remember so vividly teasing my dad about when I was really younger is he always had in his shirt pocket a pad of paper, and he always had a pencil, and he always took notes. And I always said, "What, Dad, don't you remember things?" Well, little did I know that whole infliction was going to hit me too, and that I was going to have the same thing, having to write down notes. I still write down notes, and my methodology changes quite a bit. What I do now, since the iPhone's so convenient, I actually just send myself an email. I send an email with that note that I want to remember, because then it hits my computer, and then I can remember to do things. For example, podcast ideas. I sit there and write myself an email and send it to me. I'm driving along, I have Sharon next to me. I said, "Hey, would you send me?" And she writes it down and sends me the email. Now, these notes, here's the thing. They're only good if A, you read it, and B, you can find it to read it. Those are the two things that are really important. That's where the KISS theorem comes into this whole thing. Keep it simple, stupid. So in other words, if you write a long note, at least for myself, the odds of mine going back and reading that long note can be really slim. I put in just a couple keywords, might leave out adjectives and verbs, just the keywords to jog my memory, and that's all the note has. And then I sit there and I accomplish that note and erase it or delete it or cross it out, so then I know it's done. And I'm constantly doing that. Now, there are some notes that get to the point where they're just, you could say, too lengthy to sit there and use this method with. So I actually have another note that reminds me that the digital darkroom notes are here, the photography notes are there, the biology notes are there, so I can go back and find them. You could say they're almost cross-referenced, not quite to Excel spreadsheet status, but I keep threatening I might have to do that someday to find my own notes. More importantly is, once you have these notes, they're only good if you go back and refer to them. How do you remember that? Let's say, for example, this past week, we're out photographing at Cape Disappointment. There was a great lighthouse. We actually photographed a couple lighthouses. What if you want to add that beam of light like I have there on the website? It's there for anybody to download to do that in post. There's a few steps there. There's no way you can remember all those. How do you do that? I have Word files, and I have it on the Word document in Word, and there's an idea file, the digital darkroom notes. All those notes are organized in that method. And there's a number of people I know who have volumes of notes, yet they have a problem remembering certain things because they got so many notes. So I think it's important that those notes kind of get rewritten. And that's why usually one of the first things I do on Monday morning is I go through last week's notes and I rewrite the notes of things that I need to get done, things I want to do, techniques I want to try out, and then organize my notes for other techniques that I did during that week. So then I thought about it, I've written it down, now I'm writing it down a second time. It tends to stick. And that's that old thing we were taught in school, writing things down, to help us remember things. So I don't really as often say, I'll go back to those messages I email myself. I don't let those pile up in for example, my inbox, because then I sit there and I just ignore them. At some point, I'll delete them. And then what was the point of sending it and doing it in the first place? I take the time to take those notes and transfer them to paper. That actual action of writing on paper helps me remember to get those things done. And some of them can be very trivial, some can be very important, but that's how I help myself remember things. Now, the last thing I want to touch on, which kind of Howard touched on, and again, Howard, every time I brush my teeth, I'm going to think of you from now on. Anyway, the biology. Howard asked how I remember so much about the biology. And I only know one method for that, and that's to go out and watch it all the time. So I'm not really remembering it as much as the critters are doing their thing, which is biology, reinforcing all the lessons I have learned over time. Not that I remember every single thing that I have seen critters do, but just watching them is a constant reminder, and that is muscle memory, constantly being flexed. So whatever genre of photography you happen to enjoy, what I'm going to recommend is you do it as much as possible. If you are into concert photography, right now you might not be able to photograph a concert, right? So I would highly recommend that you do two things. You watch concerts that they're constantly being broadcast on television, old concerts, remind you yourself of things, and then look at your own photographs. And you could apply this to almost all genres of photography. You can actually see somewhat, fashion, people going down the runway, remind you of all those things you have to do for runway photography, and then look at your own photographs. You can do it for sailing. You can do it for aviation. You can do it for landscape. The list goes on. And just by refreshing your memory, other things come back to you. And as long as you do this on a continual basis, then it's not so hard to remember things. And the best part is when you do that, you are prepping yourself and priming all those neurons in your brain to take in that new information for more to remember to help you move that photography ball forward. So that's, kind of what I do on a daily basis, trying to remember as much as possible. Now, understand that the one thing I never remember is people's names. Still, great apologies. I suck at that. I remember a lot of other things. That's one thing that no matter what trick I've tried, I just blow. But Some other things, not so much. So I hope that helps you, Howard, and hope that helps others answering his question, remembering it all. You guys take care, wear that mask, stay safe, and remember to make every click your story.